Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of Mondays in MMORPGs. I am Tim Anderson, aka Renfail, and I am joined by these two lovely men.
Yes, I'm Scribbles, aka Jesse, or I guess I should say Jesse, aka Scribbles. I'm co-founder of Ninja Loot Games, which is in development of Defend the Night. I'm just here to talk about my love for the genre.
And I'm Leksur, lead designer of Defend the Night. Everybody knows me as Leksur or Lex. I'm here to run my mouth and make people angry.
And take the spotlight off me.
That's
Woohoo!
right.
You're doing a good job at it.
Yes, so today's episode, is it really an MMORPG?
Probably not.
Yeah, this is a good take. We had a good brainstorming session about this when we first put together all the episode listings, and basically we're going to be looking at what defines an MMORPG. And I think we'll probably start with the first generation and go through the generations to where we are today, because there's a lot of stuff these days that's being, it's being called an MMORPG, and is it really? And I think you'd asked this question of your community in the Discord the other day, a couple days ago, in the Defend the Night Discord, like looking for people's opinions, and I saw a lot of mixed stuff in there, and maybe we'll even go to that list and talk about some of the ideas that people put forth. But I think when we look at the first generation, which people are going to argue about what is first generation. Some people would be like, oh, Meridian 59, Shadows of Eusebius, and everything. But I think we can kind of agree that Ultima Online and EverQuest were probably the kind of the starting points for MMORPGs.
When it took off.
Yeah, when they really took off and they were getting, 100,000 subscribers, 200,000 subscribers, 300,000 subscribers, and really started to define this new genre of games that had evolved out of the 90s and the origins of the internet, going from just being this thing where you could send emails to being this tool that you could use to have these huge multiplayer environments. So when we look at, I think one of those games is PvP and the other one was PvE, but the thing that they both had in common was it was a space where it was all about lots of people coming into this environment together, but playing together in a multiplayer environment, whether it was guild versus guild, guild versus environment, dungeon groups, so on and so forth. And I always, I know that McQuaid always talked about with EverQuest, like his inspiration for EverQuest was the old MUDs. And if you look back at MUDs, even those games were usually at some point it divulged into these multiplayer environments where it was groups of players going into dungeons to defeat monsters, which in turn got its start in the tabletop industry, which is, and I've preached about this for years, when you sit down and play tabletop, you're not sitting down one-on-one with the dungeon master. That's very rare for that to happen. Traditionally, it's the dungeon master and you with 3 or 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8 of your friends, usually like 3 to 5 people, right? But it's the DM, 3 to 5 of your friends, and you're sitting down for these tabletop sessions where you're sitting down for 2 to 3, maybe 4 hours, and you're playing a game together as a party of adventurers in this world where you are going out and overcoming the challenges. And I think that Ultima Online and EverQuest both kind of established that early essence of that. And we can even look at the terminology: massively multiplayer online role-playing game. So there's no single player in there. It's massively multiplayer online. And over the years, we've seen that kind of evolve quite a bit. So I know I've talked a little bit about the introduction to the genre. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts, and we'll just see where this conversation goes.
You want to go, Lex?
Sure. Well, I mean, one thing we have to also acknowledge is that a lot of the terms have evolved over this course of the existence of MMOs. Massively in 1999 is not the same as massively today. So
that's a good point. Yeah, server sizes.
Back in '99, if you had 200 people in a zone, that was considered massive. But today, that's kind of like a drop in the pond, So even though our perception of certain terms of that have evolved, does it really stand? I mean, if 200 back then was considered a massive amount of people online, does that still qualify today as a massively online game?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Because let's say if you have 200 people in a zone, personally, I think that counts. Because I don't look at it as in terms of raw people. I look at it as terms of potential interactions. So even if you have 10, 15, 50 people online, that's a massive amount of interactions you can have with other people. And interactions that can modify your gaming experience because you can play together. Where things tend to get a little mucky is where you combine a lot of newer technology. Like I think one of the best examples of this would be Skyforge. Everyone logs into a central hub where there's a lot of people running around. But when you go into an actual area where you fight, there's a few places that are kind of open, but I think they're kind of stealth capped at like 10 people because you never see that many people. But if you go into a group dungeon, it's literally just, okay, 4 of you guys group up, start the dungeon, and it warps you there and you go through your own instance. I have a hard time there because in terms of those group instances, a la like Guild Wars 1, it's the exact same thing. I'd want to consider it an MMO because there are hubs where you have a lot of interaction with other people. But when you can only actually play the game with a set amount of people with no other interaction, that doesn't feel like an MMO to me. So it's almost like MMO 0.5 versus a full MMO to me. But with the way marketing works, it would make more sense for them to market that as an MMO versus, oh, it's kind of like an MMO. So I think that's where all these things have combined together to make the waters very, very murky.
Yeah, I think it needs to be recategorized. I mean, there's a lot of games that aren't really massive. Like World of Warcraft, to me, isn't a massive multiplayer online game, even though it's labeled that. For me, if you want to say massive, it'd be things like EVE Online, maybe the new game, the Camelot Unchained, because they have large battles. But I think we need to redefine what we're selling. Right now, it's just a marketing ploy to put the MMORPG up there because it's massive. It's so it's just a play on words. I don't agree that many of the games that are out today are MMORPGs. They're just categorized as such.
Yeah, I've started telling people like, no, it's not an MMO. It's a massively single player online game. Like
there's a ton of good examples of those too. Yeah.
Right. Like, let's take Outrider as an example. It's a great game. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to bash it here, but that's not an MMO. And I've seen people describe it to me as an MMO.
What game?
It's like Outriders.
Outriders?
Outriders.
Outriders.
Sorry, I'm Canadian.
Sorry. Yeah, I was like like
Riders.
oats that you give to the horse.
No,
Outriders. Gotcha.
Right. I mean, you can play with I think up to 3 or 4 people in a party.
Sure. That's a co-op game, right?
It is a co-op game.
But they're calling it an MMO?
I don't know if they specifically do, but I have had people describe it to me as an MMO. And that's where I'm like, no, that's more of a massively single player online game because it is a single player game. You can play it single player all you want till you're red in the face. You just have the option to play multiplayer in a co-op fashion. So
that's also, isn't that what? Because I played the open beta for Magic Legends, I think is what it's called, like a couple weeks ago,
Yeah.
And that was the first thing that I remember when I first heard about the game a year and a half, 2 years ago. It was marketed as an MMO/RPG, and then I read the press releases leading up to the open beta, and the creative director and people are saying, "Oh no, we've kind of decided to pull back from the MMO, and now we're calling it more of an action RPG kind of thing." And then I still see some people trying to classify it as an MMO, but then when I got into it, it's like it even tells you during the tutorial that you can play it all by yourself, solo, all the way through to everything, but that you have the option to group up with 2 other people for a 3-man party. And then I actually got into the open beta, and once you get out of the tutorial, you're in an open world environment, and there are other people running around doing things in the same area as you, but it's optional if you group up with those
Right. And
people
it
or
doesn't
not.
really have much of an impact on your play,
No.
to be honest. Because you can walk into an area where there's a quest to do, hit one thing, and if someone else finishes it for you, you still complete it.
Which, by the
But
way, is what World of Warcraft now does, and it didn't used to be that way, in
yeah,
retail anyway. And also, I believe ESO does it the same way, where,
hmm
you know, it used
you
to
just got to
be
be nearby and do
right.
something.
Or like the world events
That's
in Guild Wars 2.
yeah, that's the everybody gets a participation ribbon mentality.
Yes, which threw me. The first time I experienced that was in probably in retail work. One of the times I tried Warcraft retail. Um, I was killing mobs and doing a quest, and some guy ran by and was like, he would literally just hit tag my mobs and go run off and do it, and then just he was running around getting all the mobs in the area. And so I sent him a tell, and I'm like, dude, can't you tell that I'm doing quests here? Can you please leave my mobs alone? And he's like, everybody gets credit, noob. And I'm like, what? And so then I go online and I research it, and I'm like, holy shit, I did not know that everyone gets credit as long as you just tag the mob, which is that ribbon mentality. Everybody wins this way, because then it's like nobody has a camp. It's everybody. But what the thing I don't like about that is, like, if I'm the one who spent the time to clear the area and I'm the one who broke the camp, blah 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 blah, and now suddenly someone else can come in and just hit the mob one time and they get equal credit to me, and I'm the one who did all the work. I'm like, that doesn't
Yeah,
feel very fair to me, first of all. And second of all, yeah, I don't at what point there's no longer
I'm
a
gonna
need for cooperative
play devil's
gameplay.
advocate here because
Sure.
as a designer, there's a lot of things being a game designer that it's really shed a lot of interesting light on.
Yes.
So let's take the problem that we've had in older games that don't have that sharing or whatever we want to call it. You had a problem with people being very nasty and very mean to each other because people are entitled to think they're better than everyone else. That's human nature. So you would have people fighting over camps, fighting over spawns, kill stealing. It was a very, very large problem back in the
Mm-hmm.
day. No matter what kind of game you were, really.
Yeah, that's why the sharding came about.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that got abused because you could go jump shard to shard to shard to camp multiple rares and basically say, screw you guys, it's mine. Which,
Did we lose Lexer?
Oh yeah, he's gone. He's paused in an awkward position.
Well, until he comes back, on a side note, what he was just talking about, the sharding.
didn't really help anything. It alleviated or that why even bother when you can get someone else to do it for you, riding on someone else's coattails, or you get upset because you put in all the work and people are
Technical difficulties.
Nope, it must be
riding
the
on your success.
server.
There's want more, or are you willing to deal with the most? Because that's essentially all we have. It's which one can you deal with the most?
Awkward.
Yeah, I'm waiting to see, because I was
Oh,
checking.
did I freeze?
Yeah, you froze up a little bit there, buddy. No problem.
Son of a gun.
It's all good.
You're stuck in this position like this.
I lost the video on my end of him.
Yeah. So I just see him stuck on my screen.
Gotcha. Well,
With his mouth open.
on the sharding thing, that was one of the things that I came across in one of the first progression servers that EverQuest did, one of the official progression servers, and they allowed you to jump between zones. There was a time limit on it. It was like a 5-minute time limit or something, and you couldn't do it in combat. But I remember being out at the chessboard in Butcher Block, and
It's a pretty genius way to resolve the conflict.
well, to a degree,
yeah.
because what I experienced was, I'm out there camping. I'm like out there for an hour and a half with my friends, and there's like 4 of us. And all of a sudden, this guy pops in, and he's doing a 6-box group. So he's got a full group, and he's boxing. Doesn't pay attention to us. He just comes in, and there was a couple of spawns because we were a little under level, so we were killing them slowly and breaking up the spawn, and so we had the rotation set. And he comes in and just wipes everything out off the chessboard, pops out, and goes away. And then like 20 minutes later, he's back in again. And after the third time, we sent him a message and said, "Hey, dude, what's up?" And he goes, "Well, if you can't keep the spawn clear, it's free game." And he was just jumping between the 10 instances and just clearing out the spawn. And because there's 10 instances open at that point, he was able to just jump between them at will and he didn't care about the camps. So we'll
So
see.
there's more mobs available for him.
Right, because he's jumping
but-
between the shard instances.
Mhm.
Or is he back?
Sorry, my internet decided to take a poop.
It's all good. We
Yeah,
I
we're
don't
just
know. I don't know
about
how much.
about effectiveness of sharding and how
because
you can just
there are pros to it, yeah.
you could have
There's
endless
pros and cons
mobs.
to everything.
Mhm.
I mean, you can't select any particular design that's been used before without having a clear indication of what the pros and cons are, and it's just a matter of deciding which of the cons are you willing to deal with more than the others.
Hmm. This actually, coming back around to, we're talking about ways that game companies have addressed like too many people being in an area, which I think spins back around into what defines massively and what defines, this big game. Because I think what we've seen a lot of is game companies for various reasons. I think a lot of those reasons are related to trying to deal with the toxicity of players and not enough resources to go around, is they've introduced these versions of instancing, sharding, lobbies, etc.
Yeah, it's all about stability too. I mean, your server works a little better if you have less people in it. You're not going to have the choppiness. So there's a lot of ways that these game designers went about to.
Mascara, Chris. Sorry.
My
What?
mother was a saint.
Cobre boca. Sorry, the DHL guy was down and she ran out the door without her mask. So I was my bad.
Yeah, so it's just conserving resources. I mean, a lot of people don't like sharding, but for me, it's the only way to resolve the conflict that you're having.
It does. It's weird though sometimes because I'll give you an example because my brother and I were playing Lotro a few weeks back, and I was on. He wasn't doing this quest chain that I was on, because I was doing this other quest chain that was, that was that I was doing for my own for roleplay purposes, and we were running through this instance, this version of the Misty Mountains, and we're both in the same version. And then as we're running through this pass, there's this a little small encampment of NPCs off to the right, and it was related to the quest that I had. And I asked him, I was like, "Do you see those mobs?" He's like, "I don't see anything. There's nothing there for me." And that was it's a weird instance of sharding where we're both in the same instance of the zone, of the Misty Mountains zone, but yet I have this quest line which has an optional little hub of NPCs over here, and he can't even see them because it's in my personal shard.
Yeah,
That's
immersion breaking. Yeah, definitely.
Yes,
So it's like, let's go over here and take these out. Take what out? I don't see those. It's just really you really got to play it smart. Some people said when they're traveling through zones, they end up in a different shard, and that's immersion breaking too. So you have to be smart about how you're doing these sharding. I mean, you got like if you're in the same group or in the same guild, you're probably going to want to be on the same shard more than not. So yeah, it's just effective ways to do the sharding that we need to concentrate on.
Yeah, I think with that, it's a case of one person does it, so they're not going to do it perfectly, and then they see it done that way, and the game is successful. They assume it is attributed to that. So what they do, instead of trying to innovate on top of it, they just say, "Okay, this worked, do that," which is how the whole investors versus developers thing works. Like that's what they did, you do that. Where people who are a little more in the know understand that yes, that worked. It probably did help them, but you can go further with it and do better. It's just like the sharding thing. Now, let's say there are shards set for different regions. If I'm set on the East Coast and Renfield's on Central and Jesse's on Pacific, and we're all grouped, a smart system would be to put us all in Central. But that's just not how it works. Usually it goes to the leader. But depending on how your architecture set up and all your background processes are done, maybe that's the smart move. I don't believe it is. I think finding a nice average where everyone kind of has the nice happy medium to get the better average throughout the entire group is a smarter move. But nobody's ever done it. And that's probably one of the reasons why a lot of people look down on sharding, because it's like if I join Jesse's group and I'm on the other side of the country, I'm going to have terrible latency. I'm probably going to have horrible delays, banding, all that stuff, which gives me a bad experience. And because sharding in a lot of games are like, sharding, it's not difficult to transfer your frustrations to that system, thereby telling people, oh, this game sucks, it has sharding.
Is there any game that doesn't do sharding these days?
I don't think so, though most of them tend to not advertise it. Because there's so many different ways that has been described, and everybody thinks that they're completely different systems, like sharding or instancing or layering. Let's look at ESO. It's a mega server. All that means is you have one entity called a server. But there's dozens, if not hundreds, of little servers inside that entity that all do things. And a lot of that is sharding. Because you can't have 1 million people in the same zone. It's just, even if you have the technology to handle that, your clients are going to just go. Mm-hmm. So you have to figure out a nice happy medium for a lot of people and figure out what the limit is. Because I know when ESO first came out, they're like, fill in this survey to figure out basically the priorities for what shards you go on. But they didn't actually come out and say, we shard. So you join a group. Actually, maybe they do it with a modicum of intelligence. Because I remember joining groups, going into dungeon stuff, and I've never had an instance where I've physically not been able to see my group member, or even my friends, or my guildmate. So maybe they do put a lot more work into it.
Mm-hmm.
Are there
I'll give credit where credit's due, even though I hate that game.
Are there any because I'm thinking you were briefly mentioning before we got off on the topic of sharding and stuff, we were talking about games that are marketed as MMORPGs that are not. And I look at as good examples, they started I feel that these games started off as MMORPGs and then they lost the plot along the way. So I'll give two examples, which is Lord of the Rings Online and Star Wars: Old Republic. Both of those games started off as MMORPGs, group-based content, mandatory grouping for a lot of the activities, a very little, if I had to do an estimation, I'd say 25% solo content with 75% of the game being group-based content. And over the course of 3 to 4 years of those games being out, in each case they both went to both those games also started off as subscription only, by the way. And both of those games eventually went to a free-to-play model, and at the same time that they went to the free-to-play model, they got rid of the 75% group-based content and it went reverse to where now it's 25% group-based content, all of which is optional, and 75% solo content where you could do everything all by yourself. And I know my brother and I have both complained because we feel that a lot of the magic of those games is now lost because no one's ever going to be able to experience what it was like. As an example, when you went into Lord of the Rings Online when it first launched and you had to go into the Great Barrows, which is it's like the first dungeon you get to at like level 20, maybe level 15 to 20. I think it was around level 20, and you had to go in there with a full group of 6 people, and it was an instance that took like 3 to 4 hours to do.
And it was hard,
and it was hard. You died a lot, and it was really rough. And the same thing with Star Wars: Old Republic. Like the first thing you got, like you do the tutorial, which got you level 10, but then every single starter city, starter zone, I should say, starter planet, you got shuffled off to Coruscant. So on the way to Coruscant, you hit the space station outside of your planet, And then to get to Coruscant, you had to do what's called a flashpoint, which was a 4-man instance with a really cool cutscenes, and everybody had dialogue that they could contribute to, and you got dialogue points, which were a cool social tool for later on in development because they had special rewards. But the interesting thing was you couldn't get to Coruscant unless you ran the flashpoint. So you're doing a level 10 dungeon and you have no option. You must do it. You are not allowed to get to Coruscant unless you've done this dungeon. So it was forced grouping. And it just showed you right off the gate, this game is going to have a lot of stuff to do that requires you to group with other people. Because at level 10, you've only been playing the game for 5 hours and you're already being told, guess what? You got to group up with other people. And then that fell to the wayside in exchange for free to play. So I feel those are two games that started off as MMORPGs and now could more be casually classified as MMOs, MMOGs if you want to say that, massively multiplayer online games because yeah, you can play them and there's people there, but if you don't want to, you don't have to talk to people or group with people or do anything with people. I don't know
Yeah, I
if there's
mean,
any other games you guys can think
this
of.
this is one of the things where we're probably have completely wildly differing opinions here because, like, for me, MMO means that other people can have an impact on my gameplay. They can
Impact how though? That's a good.
they basically impact it anyway, like through grouping, through raiding, through PvP, through questing, just
Storyline, yep.
storyline. Like they can help me, they can hinder me. Either side of the fence, they have an impact on my experience. So games like Guild Wars 1, it was barely an MMO in my opinion, because the only impact they ever had was when you were in a group, and 9 times out of 10, if like one person was being kind of an ass, you just kick them and you were still fine.
Mm-hmm.
But so to me, it was like, yeah, you have a very minimal impact on my gameplay, just enough to barely put that MMO tag on there. Um, but then like I still consider SWTOR an MMORPG because while yes, you can play 70, 80, 90% of that game solo, other players in the open world areas do still have a very large impact on my gameplay. We can still group up, we can still be a detriment to each other, we can still help each other, or just I can watch him do something crazy and die, which still impacts, even if it's just impacts me on an emotional level.
Gotcha.
But with the whole, I mean, like for you, Renfield, that's your idea or your opinion of an MMO means that you have to interact with other people. You must. Where mine is just there's the opportunity. And I think one of the hardest things, especially with this episode, is that a lot of viewers are probably going to feel one way or the other, or a third option.
I definitely, because I've heard you and I are definitely in the two camps that I've most frequently heard from, which is either the people that say, well, if it's got other people and we're all playing online together, then that's an MMORPG. And then there's the other
Right.
side of the fence that says if you're not grouping up together, it's not an MMORPG. I think I don't know that I've heard a third.
So,
Jesse.
I want to talk about the Crocs of Valyria.
Okay.
I bring this up a lot. They had a multiplayer online evolving world called the Meow.
Okay.
Well, it's
Sounds
like
like
I gotta give the guy credit. He had the good terminology, maybe not the good execution, but that multiplayer online evolving world like spoke to me. That was one of those things where if we need to reevaluate the way we go about categorizing games, that would be probably one of them. Maybe not so generic as calling it Meow, but something along those lines. Because I want to see a categorization that's outside the MMORPG terminology. That way I can know that I have effect on the world, and I can look at those type of games, because there's a lot of games out there that you just don't impact that world.
Okay, so this I think this is that topic you had brought up.
Mhm.
Did we put it in the notes? I'm gonna go check the notes real quick. Okay, ask questions like if your character doesn't impact the world, is it an MMO? I think that's I think
Well,
that's the
yeah.
question you're posing.
Yeah, I mean, Well, not just that. I just think it needs to be recategorized so we can actually label our games correctly.
Well,
I
you
mean, does that make
just
any sense to you?
yes, and you also bring to mind what they were at least theorizing
Hmm.
when they were putting together at least the first presentation I saw for EverQuest Next of this
Hmm.
world that was going to be fully impacted by the decisions that the players made, and the world was going to react to that. Um,
Hmm.
I feel like that's kind of the direction that line of thinking goes,
Hmm.
um, because most games, and I'm thinking like EverQuest right now, but any game, because this is
Hmm.
something that came up a lot when I was designing quests and stuff for Saga. Um, One of the things that drives me nuts about MMORPGs, every MMORPG that has ever come out since the creation of this genre
Hmm.
has static quests.
Right.
So the quest may have been written in 1999. It's still in the game and it's still completed the exact same way that it's always been completed. And I've always looked at that and said, like, where is the evolution of a game world?
Hmm.
Now, some games have somewhat done this. Like World of Warcraft had the Cataclysm, and they changed zones and they changed environments, and might have been a swamp one day, next day it's after the patch it's a desert, or this zone now has a rift running through it like a Grand Canyon. That kind of stuff has happened in games, but it's still a static event,
Hmm.
and it happens once and then it's there for everybody that plays the game for the next 6 years or whatever until there's another event that changes that. And one of the
Right.
things that I always talked about, which is a pain in the ass from a developer point of view, is going in and constantly changing the environment of the zones, not not automatically, but having a storyline. But this requires a ton of man hours is the problem. But having an ongoing, evolving storyline where these guys attack this zone, so this month it's all about that. Then next month you do a patch. They've now taken over the zone, and now all of the encampments that used to be controlled by this other group are now controlled by this new group. And then the
Hmm.
next month you change it up again, and there's this continually evolving storyline which changes what's going on in a given zone. But that's incredibly difficult to do in terms of man hours, because you got to have world builders working on the changes to the zone. You have to have quest writers making changes to the quests. You have to have, there's VFX and all this other stuff. That's a huge undertaking, which I think is why most games don't do it. But now we're getting into these systems that can
Right.
automatically populate a zone, can automatically populate a dungeon, can automatically change the way a dungeon looks. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know how much that's going to factor into that line of thinking of games that continually evolve as players are playing them.
Hmm. Yeah, but I think they're like, just to go back on the categorizing the games. I mean, there almost needs to be another category for
Mm.
the Eve Onlines and the Camelot Unchains, because those are large scale battle games. Uh,
Yeah, because right now
Almost
they're
certainly,
generically
and they're open
categorized.
worlds.
mhm. So I mean, if that we should probably do that, but it's just the marketing ploy is to just label everything under MMORPG,
Right.
just to
If you have more than one
sell
person on,
boxes.
if you have
Woo!
more than
Yeah.
one person slap MMO on it, you'll
Yeah.
cater to
Mhm.
a whole new crowd. And then when they get angry, like what it still steams me about Magic Legends, because it was like MMO, and I grew up and I played Magic a little bit, not a whole lot, but um, it was enjoyable. I liked the lore of the world and stuff. But then I started watching the trailers. I'm like, that's not an MMO. That's like a lobby based game.
Game.
Did either of you play?
But then once people started calling them on their BS, they're like, "Oh yeah, we're moving away from MMO."
Mhm.
It's like, well, then why did you lie to us to begin with?
I think I brought this up in the brainstorming episode. There was a Star Trek mobile game, Star Trek Fleets or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and it was marketed as an MMO. But it's like a mobile, but it's like the knockdown version of Eve, but I don't know. I also look at
That's
those
that's
and
that's a whole different category right there, because, like I tell people, it's like, just because there's a million people playing your stupid little game on the phone does not make it an MMO.
right.
Yeah.
Because there is no way that other players really impact you. I mean, I don't get me wrong. I didn't look into that specific title, but there's a difference between having an impactful interaction and just being able to chat or being able to send your minions at someone else's base, like that was a Clash of Clans. They claimed that was an MMO too, and I'm like, no, it's not, because the other player is not even there doing anything when you're doing something. So they don't. I can impact him, but he can't impact me unless he just attacks me back.
That's
Like
like
that's
the
not an MMO.
yeah, that's like the I have Galaxy of Heroes on my phone, which is a Star Wars game. It's very much single player, but the one thing about that is the PvP of that game. It's literally your team fighting someone else's team, but when you're fighting them, it's automated. They're not actually fighting you. It's just the team that they set up to put into the PvP system to get points for participating in the PvP because you do your dailies, you know. But there's no actual strategy going on. There's no player versus player actually taking place. It's one automated team versus, you know, you can manually control your team during those fights, but the other team is purely automated at that point. Um, I do like the line of thinking about redefining, because this is the thing, like when you ask people what is EVE Online, and people are like it's a PvP, it's a PvP MMORPG. That's what I hear about that game. But
Right.
how many other games are categorized as a PvP MMORPG? Like Crowfall is being called a PvP MMORPG. Shadowbane, um, I'm blanking. Chronicles of Valyria. What's that one that Simmerg's always
No,
promoting?
Crocs of Valyria was a Meow.
Right. What's the one
Ashes
that
of Creation.
Ashes of
Yeah.
Creation? That's another PvP MMORPG.
Mm-hmm.
But then we also have PvE
Mm-hmm.
MMORPGs that
Yeah, I think that the thing of terminology right now is just to define what's massive. Is it just people that can be in the same area, maybe not interacting, but are in the same city? Is that MMORPG, or is it they have to be having this large siege battle on a castle or something along those
Right.
lines? So
And
I
it's
think
like
that
when
we
we
need to
first started
figure
this
that out.
discussion, I I actually wasn't agreeing in my mind with having to categorize, because maybe I'm just an old bastard and stuck in my ways. But then, like, you bring up very good points here. Maybe it is time, because when you think about why categories even come around, is because there's just such a broad amount of
mm,
them. You need a way to narrow them down. So, like with shooters, there are so many different ones. You got sci-fi shooters, military shooters, third-person shooters, first-person shooters. You know, there's just tons of different ones. Because just to say it's a shooter really describes nothing.
right, and that also
Right.
gets into the case where you've got people who are like, I love shooter games, and then you're like, well, what shooter games do you like? And then you rattle off a bunch of third-person shooters, and they rattle off a bunch of first-person shooters, and they're like, hang on a second, our idea of what a shooter is completely different because I don't like any
Right.
of the shooters that you like.
Right. And then you got like looter shooters,
Yeah,
right? But
Borderlands, yeah.
we're finally at a point now where there is so many MMOs that I'm gonna even though I didn't say it out loud, I'm gonna go ahead and say I'm gonna revise what I was thinking and say, yeah, it probably is time to start recategorizing these a little bit.
That is,
Especially with Steam dropping, what is it, like 300, what is it, 89 games a day or something
it's a
Something
ridiculous
ridiculous.
amount. Yes.
ridiculous. So we're getting so many games a day. We need to have a better categorized.
I actually I've been listening as we've been talking. I've been looking at the notes. I actually I want to tie episode 5 into this one as well. By the way, because it's so integral to what we're talking about. So episode 5 is mismarketing games, and I feel like we can just bury that lead into this episode as well because it's also about the companies that are, you know, I think the industry needs to start categorizing things a little bit better. But this also comes back to the marketing divisions, and we've touched on marketing a little bit in here. But I know, especially, I think that the example that came up when we were talking about the brainstorming, excuse me, was like Fortnite being labeled
An MMO.
as an MMO, and I've also looked at like Destiny 2 being labeled as an MMO, and it's like, but is it like? I've played a lot of Destiny 2, and I've always considered it I consider it a shooter game. even though I guess technically it has MMO elements because you can do dungeons with your friends. It's, 3-person teams, co-op adventure game, no different than running a dungeon in Warcraft with your friends. It's just you're shooting instead of tab targeting. Um, but when it comes to the marketing divisions, I think this is also a weird thing because I don't. Do any of us consider Fortnite to be an MMO?
It doesn't. There's no evolving world, so I think it comes down to the evolving world part that we need to recategorize. So if you're just online with some players like a battle royale, that's not an MMO. Sorry, I mean,
Yeah. Well,
it's not.
even talking about that, like one of my biggest gripes about MMOs is that every MMO is basically a set on a cardboard set, like an old style TV set. You just go through the motions, do it, and nothing really changes. I mean, if you are playing an EverQuest, you run through these common lands. It's the same as it's been 22 years ago or 23 years ago. If you're a Warcraft player, the Barrens is virtually the same, at least as far as I know. I don't know if Cataclysm touched it, but there are zones that are still the same that they've been for decades. To me, that's not a world; it's a stage.
Mm.
Rift came a little closer by doing their events where certain hubs could be taken over by enemies. That was cool. Guild Wars 2 kind of lied to their people by talking about their dynamic events, which really weren't. They were just scripts that could diverge. Nothing dynamic about that
No,
shit.
and it's boring as hell too. After you've done 2 or 3
right.
of them, it's like,
You
okay.
do it once, you know what's going to happen. It's like, oh, well, this time we lost. Okay, well, what's going to happen? Well, obviously the centaurs are going to be here. But anyway, you see games like Minecraft where you actually change the world. You see MMOs, and I know it's a sore point, but EverQuest Next. That was, assuming it wasn't alive from the beginning, was poised to be the literal next evolution of MMOs. What MMOs are supposed to be. But even myself, I didn't get a founder pack, even though I love EverQuest dearly.
Yeah, I didn't buy it either.
Because my spidey senses were tingling, or my developer senses were like, there is no damn way they can pull this off. Not in that era. So I stayed off. Thankfully, my intuition paid off. But I do seriously think that something along those lines is going to be the next step, where the world literally changes over time, rather than just stay a static stage.
So I guess my next question on that point is, I mean, because we're seeing a lot of automation come into play, and the things that I had proposed doing when I was, working on Saga with Sima was, saying that everything that I was theorizing was going to be done by developers. It had to be manual, which was going to cause a nightmare in terms of man hours. And now we're seeing a lot more automation come in. I mean, do you think that that's the next evolution, is going to be the automation of those systems, or a
I think
blend
so.
of the two?
Well, that and probably just a little hint of AI. AI isn't what a lot of people really think it is. It's just an algorithm that is able to change itself based upon parameters. There's no real intelligence into it, but then again, you could say the same about people.
Yeah, it's just an automatic way to move up and down levers.
Right. And the thing is, I'm not saying that as a bad point either, because that can add variation without feeling like RNG. Because RNG was always a way to add variation. The problem is that some people relied on it too much, some people relied on it not enough. So you ended up getting wildly different experiences from game to game that use RNG, which is why it became a bad thing. Because it's like, if I kill a skeleton that has a sword, oh look, he dropped a club. What? It's like, no connection here. So they used it maybe too much, where they could have said, okay, he has a sword. Now let's do a little RNG on that sword. That would have been much better in my opinion. But if you can do automation, you can do procedural, and then you add a little bit of AI into the mix, certainly not an easy task by any measure. But I think the game that can manage to put those things into the world, not necessarily directly to players, but to the world itself, is going to be the next big game.
Yeah, you just said something I think that's very key. Not going to be easy because we've seen a lot of companies promote these ideas of what's going to be the next big thing, and it's like what you're talking. If these AAA companies that have had these games that are making billions of dollars haven't put in these procedural steps yet, I think that goes to show that maybe the technology's not quite there yet, or just maybe people haven't been willing to invest the amount of time needed to R&D that. But the idea that some indie company is going to come along and save the day, I think is a little unrealistic unless
Yeah.
you've got an unknown factor that
Well,
nobody's come across yet.
The big problem is that it's to do something very innovative. 9 times out of 10 is going to be expensive.
Expensive and risky. I mean, that's
Right.
just fact.
And the problem with AAA studios is that they're backed by people who are just there to make money.
Yep.
The investor. They don't know a goddamn thing about game. It's like literally, I could go invest into a car company and be an investor, and I can, if I buy enough stocks, I can tell them what they should be doing. But in actuality, I don't know a damn thing about cars. I know press pedal, go vroom. That's it.
Vroom, vroom.
But yeah, and that's the problem we're having with AAA studios right now is where the people in charge don't know what they're doing. They act like they do, they talk like they do, but all the results prove they don't. Then you have indie companies who are willing to try their hand at being innovative, to try different things. And then the problem they run into is that, oh, wow, this, I thought this might be 200 or 300 hours. No, this is a multi-thousand-hour implementation. To justify that to your fans is something that's virtually impossible because most fans don't understand. No matter how much you explain them, you're never going to get them to fully understand unless they have developer training or they have some experience to see how much work actually goes into it. So the only real hope is that an indie comes along, is willing to fail, but they are successful enough to where a AAA studio will jump on board because it obviously was a good idea. They just didn't have the resources to pull through all the way.
We were just talking about this in my Discord the other day. One of my long-term community members, Adric, he and I are both playing Solasta, which is this new top-down RPG.
Plug.
Huh?
Plug.
Yeah, free plug for them, which is a great game. I've done a couple episodes on my YouTube. I've been playing through it. It's an early access game. It's a lot of fun. But he and I were both talking in Discord that one of the things that we've seen that's really innovative with that game is the entire intro, the character creation process, as well as the way that game starts off, where each of your 4 party members have this unique background based on the decisions you made during the character creation process. And then when you get into the game, the tutorial is literally you running through each one of those individual storylines up to the meeting of those characters in the tavern. And again, each tutorial is influenced by the decisions you made during character creation process. And we looked at that, and his comment in Discord was something along the lines of, here's this indie company who did this really cool thing. I can't wait to see what a AAA company is going to do once they see how this has been done and they take that and expand upon it with a huge budget and turn it into a polished version of that experience.
Right. A good example is like Procedural Generation. There's to this day not a lot of games that are AAA studio that do procedural generation. A lot of indies do it. Valheim does it. Mm-hmm. But I think the only one that really is coming to mind, well, actually 2, 3, Black and White, the old God game, Spore, because they're I think one of the first ones to do procedural animation. And one that I've been playing a lot recently is Warhammer 40,000 Inquisitor, which is a Diablo-like ARPG that uses tiles. So they procedurally generate their each level with tiles. Not the same as, like, say, Valheim, who completely generates their entire world based upon input you give it. But it's still it's a higher end studio that is doing something similar. Mm-hmm. But more and more AAA studios are seeing that the procedural generation has much more potential in terms of content because you can just snap your fingers, let it go, and build a world. If someone goes to a new zone, there's not a zone that already exists, well, whip one up and save it. And it's really surprising that a lot of mainstream AAA MMOs haven't done that over some of the things that they've touted about doing, like SWOTOR. They made a big stink about how it's like, oh, when you fight, you're actually fighting, which it's great. It really is. But when you can create virtually infinite content, I think one is obviously a better choice, especially for an MMO, where the primary problem that studios have is that people burn through your content very, very quickly.
No, so much more quickly than anyone ever anticipates that they will.
Yeah. So the next evolution is player-created content. That's next.
No, evolution. Because that Neverwinter game proved that that's not true.
And also, you get to. I think the biggest issue that I've seen with that is people do stupid things when you give them the freedom to do stuff like that, and you get into the above and beyond naming policies, just the way people build buildings that can be offensive without getting into that. That's tricky. I don't disagree with you though. I think at some point, but hang on a second, didn't EverQuest Next, aka Landmark, wasn't that part of their whole thing? Was they were letting players build things in Landmark and then submit it to them for implementation to the game if it passed certain quality checks?
Yes. That's what we were talking about. That was supposed to be the next evolution of.
I call that crowdsourcing.
Yeah, it's just crowdsourcing your content at that point. Which Shroud of the Avatar did that as well because they Now here's the downside of that. It sounds great, but because they relied so heavily on it for the base version of the game, a lot of the music, as an example, there is wide variation in music styles in Shroud of the Avatar because they crowdsourced all that music, and so there's no one, like Jeremy Seale, I think is his name, who did music for a lot of these games. Like you listen to listen to like the music from Icewind Dale and Icewind 2. It is a uniform. All of the music sounds. You could tell it's the same composer that is written.
It's coherent.
It's a coherent theme. Whereas with Shroud of the Avatar, you come in and it was crowdsourced, so you got all these variances in the music styles. And the same thing with, they did a lot of crowdsourcing with assets, and so you have a wide variation in the starting. Now later on, when they got beyond that and they had a big enough team and they had world builders, it became a consistent art style. That's tricky.
It also gets tricky from a studio standpoint because let's say a 3D modeler starts submitting models to you. Well, what if all of a sudden now your game gets really, really big and making tons and tons of money hand over fist? Now this guy was like, I can't just wait for free. No, I need to get something. And he starts throwing a fit.
Yeah, because here's the contract these days. A contract doesn't really mean that much, and I'm being very realistic when I say this, because anybody can take you to court over that contract and claim that, well, that's not what I thought the contract meant. I thought it meant this. And if you have a good enough lawyer who can argue that side of it, then it's no different than I was talking about this somebody the other day, looking at the guy who wrote the Witcher series. Years ago, he didn't think this is before video games were a big thing. He just gave the rights away for next to nothing to CD Projekt Red because he was like, I'm going to get 50 grand. I don't know what he got, but he's like, I'll get $50,000. It's never going to be a big deal. And then 20 years later, CD Projekt Red has become this billion-dollar thing, and he's got the Netflix show, and these games are making hundreds of millions of dollars. And he went back and took them to court and said, I know we have a signed contract from 20 years ago, but I didn't know what video games were going to do, blah, 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 blah. And, he was able to reach a new settlement. And I guess kudos to CD Projekt Red for being willing to, reach a settlement with him over that. But at the same time, it's like what you're just saying, that can happen to any company, which is a scary situation.
Right. And I mean, let's face it, if you are an indie MMO, let's say you're just doing really well, and you have a volunteer who is providing you with assets, and all of a sudden he decides to take you to court. Doesn't matter that you're going to win. Doesn't matter that it's basically a lockdown shut case. That's going to get out, and it's going to look very bad, either way, because half people are going to take your side, half people are going to take their side, and it just comes down to who screams the loudest. Truth does not even come into the equation.
Unfortunately, no.
So it's one of those things where, like, I've volunteered time to help other studios before I had joined Defend the Night, and I got turned down quite a lot, and I'm like, that's fine, I understand. But then I started thinking of it from a business standpoint, and I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't be accepting anybody here.
It's tricky.
Yeah.
So we've kind of talked a little bit about, we need to redefine some of these categories.
Genres, yeah.
And then the marketing a little bit as well. Is there any, I mean, because I look at the marketing of things and mismarketing these games as MMORPGs. I think this is also something that ties into a lot of these games that are being developed in early access. Because you see games that are being, let's just,
Like Torchlight was an MMO, and then now they're not.
Crocs of Valyria was an
Yep.
MMO. Now it's not. And obviously there was those are two very different, examples of that. But I think it's tricky too because you have a lot of. I'm gonna probably. I don't know if I'm exaggerating when I say this, but I'll just say this for the sake of it. I feel like there are a lot of indie teams who don't necessarily know how much work is going to go into creating an MMORPG, who get into it thinking that they're going to be building an MMO, and then they get 6 years in and they're like, oh shit, this was way more difficult than we thought it was going to be. We need to scale back, cut the feature creep, cut this out, cut this out, cut this out, cut this out. And by the time you've cut all these things out, you now have a product that is not necessarily an MMORPG anymore. And at that point, it's like, should these companies be liable for mismarketing their products? And
personally, I believe yes.
I mean, yeah, I mean that's one of those things where, I mean, it's tricky too because depending on where the studio is located, there are different consumer laws and consumer regulation policies depending on whether or not it's a Canadian studio, a U.S. studio.
In some cases, it's different from state to state.
And exactly. So I mean, it's this thing where we don't have a universal label that we can apply to whether or not a company is mismarketing their product or not.
Again, it's back to, are you asking for money? If you're asking for money for a product that you advertised and it's not that product anymore, that's an issue. It's false advertisement. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and that's where we get into, people like the case of Crocs of Valyria. You've got people who have a class action lawsuit because they banded together and said, you promised us something, you took millions of dollars for this thing, and then you didn't deliver it. Now you're delivering something completely different. That's class action lawsuit. That's attorney general, state attorney general. That's, and that's unfortunately that's happening with multiple studios in the independent sphere. I think we're getting to the point now in terms of looking at the recategorization or relabeling of the different genres, as well as let's just say professional marketing,
Yeah, I need to clean it up.
Or
It's
ethical
really
marketing even.
There's no such thing.
I know. It's a fun one to say. Ethical marketing.
The only ethical marketing is to shut your mouth.
That's pretty much it. Because, I mean, the reality is like, I'm just gonna. Here's a headset I've got. I've got the Under Armour. This is my gym before I quit going to the gym. These were expensive headsets. This was like a $275 headset. And I love it because the earpieces are detachable, and so you can wash them. And I'm a big sweater, so I mean, but if these were marketed as like a gaming headset, they're not. There's no microphone. The quality in terms of talking to people is not that great. You can obviously take a call on them, but it's not nearly as good as, say, having an actual headset. So when the company that built these went out there and marketed these, they marketed them specifically as a set of headphones for people who work out at the gym and who sweat a lot. I actually specifically bought this because Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has his own version of these, and that MFer sweats like a beast. And I was like, if he's wearing these, then I'm going to wear these. And I totally bought them because of that. But they do work incredibly well. But the way they were marketed was very specific. They weren't marketed as a general set of headphones that anybody can use. It was specifically, this is a headset for the gym.
Right. And it's it's odd because I've done a little bit of marketing myself, and it's like, do you fudge your description to get a wider audience, knowing that like the magic number when I was doing it was 10%, assuming 10% people are upset. Um, or do you narrow down your marketing and ensure that a higher percentage of people are going to be happy?
And that's honestly, that's going to depend a lot on the owners of the business.
It is.
Because I can tell
I
you,
I personally have way more respect for people that do the narrow, because that way I know what I'm buying. If I'm disappointed in something, it's just me.
yes,
It's not that I feel like I was lied to.
if
Like,
you
oh, this is the fastest car ever, and you get into it, and all of a sudden a cop blows past you. You're like,
wait a second.
line, Saxa. You know, it's one of those things where perception or perspective, I guess is the proper word. Perspective means a lot, and everyone has their own.
Yeah, marketing's tricky. I know with my day job, what I'm doing with the people at Hidden Compass, we have a very specific niche in the travel space, and so we're extremely focused on that niche, and that makes us smaller than it could be. But that's not a bad thing because we have a higher percentage. That's what we're shooting for, which is also why when you start looking at a lot of the campaigns my wife and I have done in the past, when you're working with tourism boards, as an example, the smart tourism boards. Um, I've worked with the Port of Vallarta tourism board, and I'm going to say this on camera, and I'm just whatever. It's my opinion. I don't think that they've done the best job in the world because Port of Vallarta is very much focused on when they want to work with someone, they look at how many followers does that person have on social media, and they use that as a determining factor of whether or not they think that they're going to get good results from their campaigns. And this is why, as an example, I don't know how many of you remember the Fire Festival that happened 5 years ago now or something like that. It was marketed as this huge event. People showed up. It didn't. It was not what it was promised. But the best thing about what happened that year was the state of Florida did this big marketing campaign where they looked at people with big numbers, and so they brought Pitbull in as a representative for the state of Florida for their tourism board. They paid him $1 million to do this campaign, and it failed miserably. And the next year, the government slashed the tourism budget by like 50% because he said you guys effed it up so bad the previous year because you misspent all this money. And the reason was because they were looking at numbers and they were trying to hit this huge demographic when really they should have been focused on narrow back. Because you look at it, it's like, what do people follow Pitbull for? Travel advice? No, they follow him because he makes videos with Latin women shaking their asses and he's talking about being in the club and getting laid and drinking booze and being a hip hop star. He's a rock star basically. That's what people follow Pitbull for, is for that extravagant lifestyle and the videos that he
Basically, the
produces.
people who are in their 20s thinking they're hot
Yes,
shit or want to be hot shit,
they
or the
don't.
people who are going through a midlife crisis
Yeah,
going, "Ooh, big boobies! I wish my new wife had that."
but nobody follows him because he's a golf professional who's like, this is the best these are the best 5 golf courses in Florida that you should go to. So the most successful campaigns we've seen have always been campaigns that focus on micro influencers or macro influencers who have an extremely high percentage in terms of the ROI, as opposed to huge followers but a very it's different marketing
Right. For those
techniques
not
at
in the
that
know,
point.
ROI is return on investment.
Sorry, yeah. If we're diving into the technical sides of marketing at this point, um, but it's a fun thing too because marketing can be done in so many different ways. It really does always come back to um, you need you can never, this goes back to something we talked on the previous episode. You can never be 100% transparent with people, but you can be honest as best as you can be, because there are always
Right.
going to be things that you can't talk about. But when you're marketing a product, people need to actually know. That's why there's so many consumer regulations in the United States, because so many companies have done shady shit over the years that the government has continued to crack down on this to try to keep that from happening. But we still see things slip through the cracks, and I think this is where crowdfunding is still in such an early stage. When we talk about investments and Wall Street, we've had, I don't know how many years it's been around, 100 years or whatever. There's been all these years of worst case scenarios happening, and so every few years at a federal level, new regulations are slapped on things to make sure that those kind of things don't happen again. Look at Enron. Enron was 90s, and then Fire Festival happened, and then every year we see, who was the one a few years ago who did the pyramid scheme? It wasn't Enron. It was something else, like a pyramid scheme. I don't remember now. But every year we see, these new regulations. But crowdfunding is still relatively
Bernie
new.
Madoff.
Madoff, that's the one. Thank you very
Madoff,
much.
yeah, whatever.
That
Yeah,
was what I
so
was thinking of.
yeah, I blame it. Okay, so what do you guys think about CGI and not having your gameplay along the CGI? It's fine to have, for me, to market your game as this big glorious CGI, but then you got to have some gameplay behind it to
You,
actually represent
Mhm.
your
oh,
product.
you talking about like a marketing
Yeah,
campaign that
like
only
a
shows CGI?
yeah,
Yeah,
Oh,
like
that's
let's
bullshit.
SWTOR. They did amazing
Those were
CGI
amazing
trailers.
CGI trailers.
Amazing. If you've seen the AI enhanced ones that are 4 or 8K,
Yeah.
it's cool. It's
oh
cool.
my god,
Just show me a little bit of gameplay, though.
right?
Come on
But that is not the game in any way, shape, or form.
now. Mhm.
And I think it is a marketing ploy to get people excited so that they don't really care about a lot of the little things. But to me, as a gamer, if that's all you show me, I don't buy the game. At least I don't anymore because I bought into SWTOR. I
I'm
bought
older
into
and
it big.
wiser now.
Yeah, no, I bought into it big because I love Star Wars.
I did too. Yeah,
But like nowadays, if you show me a CGI like this stuff, I won't touch it until I see gameplay. And even then, I'm probably already looking at something else because your time, your marketing period is gone now, where you can have the most impact on potential customers.
I think
So
blending the
like
CGI with gameplay is good.
right now if you show some gameplay and then you do a cutscene that's CGI that goes into a little bit of story and then it cuts back to gameplay like a proper in-game series like how SWTOR does it, if they showed that right from the get-go, I mean, I still think the people who weren't crying and screaming about the hero engine, who had no idea what they were talking about, they would see that they would probably have a much better retention rate because people who got the game and got into it would have been very accepting of what came. Where I watched.
Yeah, but they don't care. They got their money. They got their money.
That's,
So
that's the
that's
thing.
the thing.
Once they have your money, they will not give it back unless you basically pry it from their cold, dead hands.
Is it so for them? It's better to just show the CGI and then get a wide net.
There's a marketing guy that I know in Chicago, and he basically tells people that you can say whatever the hell you want in marketing because once you have their money, depending on how much your product is, like say your product's under $100, there is no reasonable way that people will come after you for that money.
Nope.
So you can literally do a $20,000 marketing campaign, completely lie your ass off, make a couple million, but because you're taking small amounts from people, they're very unlikely to fight back.
And it's
I was like,
yeah.
that is the shittiest thing I've ever heard.
It's
like,
shitty, but it's true. But that's marketing. That's why when we were talking about, you joked about the ethical marketing thing. That's why it's a joke because most companies are going to look at that and be like, "Hey, it's an easy $2 million," because the reality is that there's not going to be enough pissed off people to get together to do a class action lawsuit. So that risk is so minimal. We might as well do that because it's free money.
Right.
Which is
the risk is minimal.
Yes.
And in terms of business, if the risk is minimal but the gains are large, you're going to do it.
Yeah, because you're going to make
fact
money.
of the matter. Doesn't matter if it's walking around kicking people's dogs. If there's minimal risk, you're going to do it as long as you're going to gain a lot.
What are some companies that you think have done marketing the right way? Since we're on the topic of marketing in the MMORPG space, I've kind of combined these two episodes, by the way, because they were kind of cross blending. What are some companies that we think have done marketing in a good way? Because what you're just talking about right there, like I look at ESO, World of Warcraft, Star Wars Republic, they all do that, where they have these huge CGI trailers that don't show any gameplay, and yet these games are highly successful.
Right. And, well, also another thing to remember that when you have a game, in particular with these really high budget CGI scenes, we're talking like these things cost like $10 million to make. Mm-hmm. There is already a demand by investors to regain that money. Mm-hmm. At virtually any cost. So that's something to keep in mind when you're seeing a game that's pushing a lot of these CG trailers. They're technically already in the hole that they have to make up by any means necessary. So if the game doesn't have the launch it expects, or say there's a lot of bugs, or they don't get the sales, whatever, they're going to do whatever it takes, regardless of what they say. They say no cash up, they'll add a cash up. They say no pay to win, they'll add pay to win as long as they can get their money back.
Yeah, because
it's a fact of doing business.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah.
But if we talk about games who have marketed like right or better,
All Guys.
I can't think of any for MMOs. I really can't. Because even taking EverQuest Next, again, we'll just cut it off at the center, not focus about the stuff that happened in the second half. They did a lot of gameplay trailers. They were scripted, but you had more in-engine visual. So by our last agreement, that would have been considered a much better way to market. Doesn't change the fact that it was ended up being a steaming pile on the floor. So while they may have done it in a more ethical way, it doesn't change the result. But if you look at companies that aren't games, or at least aren't MMOs,
I can say right now that I know Project Gorgon did a really good job.
I never really paid much attention to that one. I'm sorry.
It's such a small team. I mean, it's a husband and wife duo, and I think that's why. I'm assuming it still is. Yeah, I'm assuming it still is that way because I know it started off as a husband and wife.
Yeah, there's a lot more riding on it. Where like if they were to just come out flat out and lie to people about it, if someone decided to take legal action, they would not have the advantage that a AAA studio would have. Mm-hmm. Where most people would be intimidated by, you can't fight them, they're too big. But I mean, I think maybe Satisfactory, the 3D factory building game, I think they did a decent job marketing. I don't remember seeing anything for Valheim, but whatever they did obviously worked.
Yeah, they had a lot of hard rock, metal music. I've seen some of their trailers. It's fun. It's fun. So they did a good job, but they didn't have a bunch of money. I mean, they probably would have cast that wide net if they could. I bet you, because
and this might be a case where not having the means actually benefited them.
Mm-hmm. Possibly, yeah. I mean, I've always looked at any company that gives me weekly updates. I'm already going to give them the benefit of the doubt if I'm being able to see weekly updates as to what's being worked on, and I'm seeing progress being made.
Well, even then, if they explain why you don't see any, that to me is also acceptable.
Sure.
Because especially with MMOs, which are colossal projects, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen behind the scenes. So not all the time you're going to see visual, especially if it's a small team. Now, if you have a larger team, there's not really any excuse because you can do a little visual and a little back end.
If you've got 30, even if you've only got 10 people working, there's enough. I mean,
that's enough.
That's enough because I'll tell you right now, there's only 3 of us working on Project Drummond, and I'm tooting my own horn right now. Absolutely. So bear with me here.
Plug.
Yeah, self plug. I do 3 updates a week on Patreon, which includes screenshots and video snippets of everything being worked on, and we do daily updates on TikTok almost every single day between my brother and I, and then I do at least 3 videos per week on YouTube, which are kind of just overviews of what was shared in the Patreon post, which is much more detailed and has all the screenshots for subscribers and stuff. And then there's the various tiers. But I mean, we're doing, just cut that all away for the minute. There's 3 updates a week happening from a 3-man team. How does that work? Well, each of us is working on something every single week. So there's an update. Since we're all working on this almost every single day, there's always going to be concept art updates from Chris, there's always going to be adventure game updates from my brother, and there's always going to be updates from the tabletop game or the book from me. 3-man team, and we're doing 3 updates a week. I'm not saying that every company needs to do that, but that is, from my personal perspective, the reason I do that is because I'm a huge fan of documentation and seeing what's being done so that there is some sort of evidence for the work that's being put in, as opposed to we're
Right.
going to go dark for the next 6 months. And it's like, why do
Hey,
you
I
need to go?
resemble that comment.
Why do you need to go
Yeah.
dark? I mean, if you, and again, this is it's everybody's different. Um,
We'll spill some beans here because it's not really anything bad. Like DTN, we've gone dark for a while now, but that's just because Brian, our lead programmer, is in the process of trying to move.
yeah, you guys talked about
That,
that.
that's a big life changing event. So we can't expect him to do that. Plus, still work 40 hours a week. Plus, pump
Put
out
in time on,
updates like he has been.
yeah.
So
Well, DTN has done weekly updates for the last 2 years. So yeah, so you can go back to 2019 and see the weekly updates
Up
that we
until
had
he started moving,
up
you know.
until
So it's like,
right.
so
But even then, even though we know we can't provide our community with those kind of updates, what do we do instead? We start doing late night little hangout sessions with our community.
which everyone should show up for, by the way.
Right.
I've been to 2 of them now, and they're a hell of a lot of fun.
And
They need
sometimes
to do them more than once a month.
sometimes we talk about the game, sometimes we talk about other games, sometimes we just talk about having fun, or what's been going on with people. And we don't do this to retain our people. We do it because we care about the community. We care about the people in it. We want to know.
I think caring
we
about
have
the community is huge.
we have community driven design documents. So if they come up with something that we just haven't thought about, we try to implement that style in the game if it's possible. Of course, there's things that we can't, feature creep and everything, but if we're
Well,
like, yeah, hey, that's a great idea,
if
let's do it.
it ties into your
I mean, ties
existing
in.
design and
Mhm.
something that you think you can realistically do, there's no reason not to do it,
Mhm.
because that just buys you goodwill with your customer base.
Right. I mean, I'll give
Which
you
is
guys a
ethical marketing.
this is the greatest example, and this is why. Like I said, I really don't want. I don't like the thought of making this into a DTM plug. I really don't.
I wouldn't worry about it.
But one of the things that really made me feel like I was very proud to be on the Ninja Loot team was because when we originally sat down to do our shadow night, Jesse has what he wants, I have what I want, so and so has what they want, and we ended up coming out with a mix of like EverQuest meets Vanguard meets WoW, right? Which there's nothing really wrong with that as long as you put your own twist on it, right? That fits your game, not just copy and paste
Sure.
what's from these other games, which is really what we tried to do because I was a career Shadow Knight player. I played a lot of Death Knight as well, but we had a meeting with the community and they put some of these ideas in our heads and we're like, oh my god,
Hadn't thought about
this
that
has to go in.
Yeah.
And now we have like this insanely skillful DPS tank. It requires a very, very high level of skill where he's pet dependent, he can teleport, he can do massive damage, he can avoid damage like crazy, but it's not RNG. It's literally, I see him winding up, teleport behind him. You have to physically be a skillful player. And then all of a sudden we went from having, a pretty good Shadow Knight, I wasn't upset or disappointed to something that like, I don't care what this game does anymore because this is what I'm playing.
I want this. I think
I need this in my life. And it all came from the community.
Right.
And I think that's something that I don't know that I've ever seen AAA studios really give.
Well, the thing is like this: we understand that we're not smarter than 1,000 people giving us input.
Sure.
I mean, you gotta be, you gotta have that humility to let people let people talk, and give you ideas and feed you, so you could make a great game. So important.
Yeah, I think that's a good example of sort of the modern evolution, because also this ties into one, talking about crowdfunded games or just any sort of independent game that's doing its own bootstrap marketing campaigns, as opposed to a highly polished studio that's doing these, $2 million CGI videos. It's the other side of the coin of going, well, if you do that, sure, you're going to get all these players, but some of those are going to be deceived by the gameplay looking completely different. And then on the complete opposite end of the coin, you can actually start with the community and say, hey, this is what we have in mind. What can you bring to the table and kind of help us, if you want to be involved in this, and how can your ideas help us? make the best product available for that niche market that you're shooting for. I think those are two different sides of a very complex coin. And I think as long as, I think for me, it just comes back to as long as there's as much honesty as possible in the marketing campaigns, for me, that's the sign of a studio that I can at least get behind. And even if I'm not necessarily monetarily supporting them until they launch a product, I'm going to be more inclined to want to share their videos. I'm going to be more inclined to join their Discord. I'm going to be more inclined to be involved and help them spread the word. And not enough companies do that. The going dark thing drives me nuts. Um, it's just there's no good reason to do that. And for the public anyway. I know we did have a dark period at one point in time with Saga 2018, I think, but we weren't dark with our internal community. It was dark with the public because we had this thing we were trying to get done in a 6 month period of time while there was being a refactor that was going on behind the scenes. So that's boring. Leksur was touching on this earlier. That's boring because it's behind the scenes work.
Yeah,
But if you're,
optimization is one of those things where you just can't. I mean,
you can't
it's
show
not
it.
exciting. It's not exciting. And guess what? Maybe your publishers don't want you to show it.
Yes, well,
So
that's
that's
a
another reason to go dark. Because if you got to listen to who's funding you as
yes.
well as your community.
So the devs for this new D&D game that's coming out, I can't remember what it's called now. It's the Dark Alliance. It's the new action thing with Drist and the heroes. Um, their dev videos have been interesting because they talk about how the original prototype was a top-down isometric game, and that's when they presented that at what is the San Diego
Comic
GDC?
Con.
No, GDC.
Oh,
Um,
the game
yeah,
developer
Game Developers
conference.
Conference. When they showed that there and they got all the interest from the publishers, and then Wizards of the Coast finally got interested in the project because there was all these other publishers that were interested. That's when it went from being a top-down to a third person because guess what? If you want to get the money, you got to do what and they're wanting this to go more in this third person action driven. So you have a choice at that point. You can either do the isometric top down and go with these small publishers over here who can definitely help you release your game and get the funding that you want, or you can work with the big dog, but you're going to have to make a different game now. And you're going to have to go back to the table and redesign everything. And I'm saying that to go back to what you were just saying, Jesse, about you have to do what the funding is telling you to do. I mean, it's very difficult to have a publishing deal where they don't have some input, if
Yeah,
not
and if you
total input, on the final product.
and you gotta pay your people. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, if you can't get that little criteria checked off, you're not going to have quota that month, and that's a lot of people that are depending on you to feed their families.
Especially if those payments are coming in milestones, and it's like
Mm,
you got to hit the milestones to get the rest of the money, and you know, in those
mm,
situations, yeah, being dark is not a developer
mm,
decision; it's a publisher decision. So this is complications of
mm, mm. Yeah, so
marketing and
there
so on
might
and
be.
Business
so forth.
business is a messy business.
It can
Yes.
be. All right. Well, we're an hour and 20 minutes in, so I figure that's probably a good enough place to call it quits on our episode, which I kind of feel like we combined a couple here, which was
Yeah, I think you probably probably do too in that one.
yeah. Is it really an MMORPG slash mismarketing games? I'll have to figure out a fun title for this one. Um, but we covered kind of a whole range of what defines an MMORPG. Does the market need new categorization? Which I think all three of us are in agreement that it does. And then also looking at marketing campaigns and the fact that we need better marketing. Companies need to be more honest, more transparent as best as they can be. And from
Big
a
thing is vote with your pocket though.
yes, that's
If
that's
you,
the easiest best way
uh, I mean, because if you see something dishonest, don't give them your money until you're sure.
for
There you
sure.
go.
All right, ladies and gents, that's going to be this episode. Don't forget to stick around for the next one. We'll be coming at you next week with the next episode. Check out all the links below to what all these guys are working on. And also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you get updates for the next episode in the series. Until next time.
Bye, guys. Thanks.